How to minimize observer bias, step-by-step guide for beginners to conduct research. What is observer bias? Observer bias happens when a researcher's expectations, opinions, or prejudices influence what they perceive or record in a study. Observer bias often affects studies where observers are aware of the research aims and hypotheses. Observer bias is also called detection bias. Observer bias is particularly likely to occur in observational studies, but it can also affect other types of research where measurements are taken or recorded manually. How to minimize observer bias? It's important to design research in a way that minimizes observer bias. Note that, while you can try to reduce observer bias, you may not be able to fully eliminate it from your study. There are 5 ways to minimize observed bias from your study, which are given as under. Number 1 is use masking. Number 2 is use triangulation. Number 3 is multiple observers. Number 4 is train observers. Number 5 is standardize your procedures. And number 6 is others. That is, observer expectancy effect, actor-observer bias, Hawthorne effect, and experimental bias. Number 1 way of minimizing bias is use masking. Masking, or blinding, helps you make sure that both your participants and your observers are unaware of the research aims. This can remove some of the research expectations that come from knowing the study purpose, so observers are less likely to be biased in a particular way. You can implement masking by involving other people in your studies as observers and giving them a cover story to mislead them about the true purpose of your study. Number 2 way of minimizing bias is use triangulation. Triangulation means using multiple observers, information sources, or research methods to make sure your findings are credible. It's always a good idea to use triangulation to corroborate your measurements and check that they line up with each other. To reduce observer bias, it's especially important to involve multiple observers and to try to use multiple data collection methods for the same observations. When the data from different observers or different methods converge, you reduce the risk of bias and can feel more confident in your results. Number 3 way of minimizing bias is multiple observer. With more than one observer, you make sure that your data are consistent and unlikely to be skewed by any single observer's biases. When you have multiple observers, it's important to check and maintain high inter-rater reliability. Inter-rater reliability refers to how consistently multiple observers rate the same observation. With quantitative data, you can compare data from multiple observers, calculate inter-rater reliability, and set a threshold that you want to meet. Usually, you train observers in the procedures until they can consistently produce the same or similar observations for every event in training sessions. Number 4 way of minimizing bias is multiple observer. Before you start any study, it's a good idea to train all observers to make sure everyone collects and records data in exactly the same way. It's important to calibrate your methods so that there's very little or no variation in how different observers report the same observation. You can recalibrate your procedures between observers at various points in the study to keep inter-rater reliability high and minimize observer drift as well. Number 4 way of minimizing bias is standardize your procedures. It's best to create standardized procedures or protocols that are structured and easy to understand for all observers. For example, if your study is about behaviors, make sure to specify all behaviors that observers should note. Record these procedures, in videos or text, so you can refer back to them at any point in the research process to refresh your memory. The last not least is others ways in which first way to minimize bias is observer expectancy effect. The observer expectancy effect occurs when researchers influence the results of their own study through interactions with participants. Researchers may unintentionally signal their own beliefs and expectations about the study and influence participants through demand characteristics. The observer expectancy effect also goes by other names such as experimenter expectancy effect, Rosenthal effect, or Pygmalion effect. Example: observer expectancy effect. You're examining the effects of a new painkiller for back pain. You run an experiment with two groups. Group A, treatment group, receives the actual treatment with the new painkiller. Group B, control group, receives no treatment, but instead takes a placebo. The participants don't know whether they're part of Group A or B, but you do. Single-blind design. Unconsciously, you treat the two groups differently while conducting a survey about their level of back pain. You treat Group B as if you expect the participants to still be in pain and frame your questions more negatively than for Group A. Number 2 way to reduce bias is actor-observer bias. The actor-observer bias is an attributional bias where you tend to attribute the cause of something differently depending on whether you're the actor or observer in that situation. As an actor in a situation, you may tend to attribute your own behavior to external factors. As an observer, you may instead attribute another person's behavior, even if it's the same as yours, to internal factors. The actor-observer bias is a social psychological topic. Example: in actor-observer bias, you're working as a trainee and find yourself in a slump. You attribute that to the cold weather, the lack of sun, and a long commute to the office, all external factors. A couple of weeks later, you observe another colleague feeling the same way, but you attribute it to their own personality, work ethic, and lack of drive, all internal factors. Number 3 way to reduce bias is Hawthorne effect. The Hawthorne effect refers to some research participants' tendency to work harder in order to perform better when they believe they're being observed. It describes what participants being observed may inadvertently do in a study. The Hawthorne effect is named after Hawthorne Works, a company where employee productivity supposedly improved, regardless of the experimental treatment, due to the presence of observers. Example: in Hawthorne effect, you're a high school principal, and you've received complaints about a teacher's classroom management skills. You decide to observe their classes for the day to determine whether the complaints are justified. The teacher and students are aware of the principal observing them, which causes the students to behave better and the teacher to try harder. As a result, the principal's observations are not in line with typical behavioral patterns in the classroom. Number 4 way to reduce bias is experimenter bias. Experimenter bias covers all types of biases from researchers that may influence their studies. This includes observer bias, observer expectancy effects, actor-observer bias, and other biases. Experimenter bias is also called experimenter effect. Kindly subscribe my YouTube channel Thesis Helper. Thanks for watching.